I am the last talk of the day. I'm sure everybody's tired. So I have a light talk, and it's just between me, you, and the dinner. So I used... Oh, okay. Okay, good. I'll keep going. So, all right, yeah, I used to work at Microsoft. I was an SDE. I think they still have that job title, but they have a lot of new job titles now. I worked in a bunch of different groups. I discovered Linux by accident when I left, just on a lark. And I finished a book talking about its advantages and remaining challenges. And I ended up spending a lot of time thinking about tools. It was kind of surprised me when I started writing the book. So yeah, this is a picture of my book. My mom is in advertising, and she wanted me to put that if you use Windows or own a share of Microsoft stock, you should read my book. I ended up not putting that on the cover, but because it would have messed up my pretty picture. But anyway. And yeah, the case studies, I start off with the case study of Wikipedia, which of course everybody's very familiar with nowadays. And I talk about the Linux kernel and the Linux desktop. And I think the payoff is for things like AI and cancer research. I had my cancer research words in this talk before everybody started talking about it earlier today. And it surprised me how much I find proprietary software. Of course, at Microsoft Research, it's all proprietary, but even in a lot of universities. So I just thought for people who aren't familiar with Linux, this is one slide of why I think Linux is superior, and it comes with a dialog box like this. One of those apps that's I think pretty cool is Blender, which is a 3D modeling application which actually has a physics engine, a soft body physics engine inside it, and that's not something that Windows has, and I don't think it's going to be in Windows 7. And yeah, here is one more slide. These are the kinds of things you can do with it. Anyhow, that is a discussion for another day. I was going to talk. I was actually.
Okay, I'll shut up then.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep on going.
Yeah, because I'm sure more things people are going to want to talk about. So yeah. Anyway, tools and languages. I actually have 2 chapters about tools and languages in my book, which didn't expect to happen. I am not even a particularly much of a language person. Yeah, I spent most of my time at Microsoft programming in C and C++, and I did a few years of C#. And yeah, I'm not a language lawyer, unlike you guys. So in preparation for this talk, this is my little side note. I watched Anders Lang.net C# 3.0 talk, and it was going just fine until he said we're just going to take the projection of the lambda function and return it as an anonymous delegate to the closure of the expression tree. And I'm not sure if that makes sense or not. But it kind of reminds me of the ATL com days. I don't know if you guys remember ATL, but there was an ATL com wizard, and one of the checkboxes in it was it asked you if you wanted to aggregate the free-threaded marshaller. And it was at that point I realized that com is screwed up, and I'm glad it's dead. But I do worry that C# is getting more and more complicated. So anyway, one of the important random ideas I discovered while writing this book is that I think all non-garbage collected code, at least non-kernel mode code, should be killed. I know everybody here writes in garbage collection, uses garbage collection, and we all know the advantages, but there isn't, I don't see in the industry at least, any kind of coherent, focused effort on this task. I hear a lot of different excuses. Snobbery is one of them. And so my book actually is one chapter is a 25-page proof, although it's not mathematical, for why this should happen. In essence, you could say that this chapter is basically this idea that memory is the state of your process, and it's like really important, and it shouldn't be corrupt. And GC really is the only way to have reliable code. Now, of course, it's not sufficient, but it is necessary. And I think that using C instead of Lisp was the greatest mistake in the history of computing. And it's kind of interesting, Lisp was invented in 1959, and yet here it is that the majority of code running on everybody's laptop is not garbage collected. So, and this was another little table I put in my book, which kind of surprised me, as I knew I learned COM very well, and I learned .NET very well, at least .NET 1.0. And it's kind of funny how there's like this extreme amount of similarity between these two different programming models. I'm not exactly sure why that is. But the thing about GC is not merely that it makes your code reliable by preventing memory leaks and preventing dual freeze and so forth, but that it also enables a bunch of features. In order to have garbage collection, you end up needing reflection. You end up, the program needs to know at every line of code what exactly is going on. And so it turns out that GC is a crazy feature. And I say in my book that if there were to be a Nobel Prize in computer science, I think garbage collection would be the candidate for the first one. So yeah, these are all the advantages. I'm sure most of you guys know all these things. But one very cool thing is it's the same binary in multiple platforms. That to me seems like, hey, why don't we have that right now? I know when Apple switched over from the PowerPC to the Intel, it was a huge amount of work. But if all their code were written in GC, it would have just been no work. And another subtle advantage is just that I think you will find a lot more increased use of code sharing. On Linux, there are about 10 RSS readers, one in every programming language. And so I think if we fix the programming language problem, I think a lot of the other problems that are, I'll take questions at the end, a lot of the problems that we are running into will also go away. So yeah, when I left Microsoft, one of the things I knew was IEs, written in C++, Office, IIS, SQL Server, the shell. And VS.NET, I guess they're slowly moving it towards C#. I don't know if the C# compiler, is that written in C++ still? Does anybody know? What?
It's being ported to C#.
So yeah, right. Well, that's fine. I was just... Okay, so yeah, that's, finally. So when I look at the Linux versus Windows, I see it as currently armies of cavemen fashioning the world with stone tools. And ultimately, I think the battle between Linux and Windows boils down to a tools battle. And so,
Caveman or patient caveman?
well, actually, it's patient. You have to be patient if you program in C++. So so these are Microsoft's advantages. One of the interesting disadvantages I find is that .NET is small in scope. So yeah, you guys can just read all those.
So by smaller army, you're referring to like open source development, like Cathedral versus Bazaar stuff?
Well, just if you go on SourceForge, there's like 2 million programmers. And Microsoft has 10,000. So it's an interesting question. Why are 2 million programmers losing to 10,000 programmers?
SourceForge programmers are developing code that runs against Win32, though.
Well, some of that happens, but I don't know how much of that is. But that's still, they're still competing. I mean, whatever. I'm sure a lot. That's right. But that army can also, if that stuff runs on Linux, then Windows becomes optional. So yeah, one of the nice advantages Microsoft has is it's got the .NET platform, which is a single platform, whereas on the Linux community there's Python and Ruby and all these other languages.
Yeah, the other thing I find interesting that you listed was like no physics engine.
Yeah.
Are you talking about built into .NET itself or including open source software?
I'm talking about kind of part of the Microsoft, part of the Microsoft community.
Because there's certainly physics engines out there. Even when you look at Mono on Linux,
Yeah, right.
there's ones that even have actually patched to use the SIMD instructions directly. in
Yeah, I'm familiar with all those. But
Blender isn't a part of the Linux community, it's just an open source software that's inside of apps.
well, yeah, right. I understand, but that.
Blender and run it on Windows too.
Yeah, you can, but it's part of the. It's not. When I define Linux, I don't mean the kernel. I mean like the Linux distribution community. So.
Why is that important? Why is that important?
Why is what important?
Physics engine.
Okay.
It's in one of the...
Oh, because I think that's.
I lived 10 years without it. And
Well, you.
another 10 years without
Well, but you work in the ERP space. You don't care about that stuff. But
So I think there's probably a lot more development hours like in the world spent on ERP stuff than there is on physics engine stuff. I mean, in fact, I would say by far most of the lines of code that are written are for internal corporate use for things like ERP, and that the platform stuff is really a minority of the lines of code that are actually written in the world.
yeah, I think that's true. So I don't know what you're.
Yeah, but in general, I think if game developers need the physics engine, they can write it. So
No, they don't write it. No, there's a
bunch of them out there. In fact, there's too many out there.
Yeah,
There
that they
Yeah.
can charge a lot of money for, because in the Windows world, the game development makes a lot of money.
Yeah, but
Physics engines? I mean, come on, that's like,
And there are
That's on
open source physics engines for XNA, which runs on
Yeah.
the .NET framework.
Well, actually, I looked and didn't find any, but there are. I have looked at Codeplex, and I think Codeplex is a. Well, let me just finish my slides, and then we can have a discussion. I've got a few more things to say. So yeah. What did you say?
Beer will be here soon.
Okay, good. So yeah. So basically, I think .NET is limited by what MS envisions. Like, for example, I don't know if there's even a matrix class in .NET yet. And Linux isn't moving away from C++ very fast, and there's no clear place to go. So this is what's out there on the free desktop. Java, Mono, Python.
Stuff on Linux is written in pure C anyways.
What?
Not that much C++ code.
Oh, the Linux kernel?
Not the Linux kernel, and a lot of Linux software is
Yeah.
written in pure C.
Yeah, right.
And most of the desktop APIs, GNOME is written in pure C, and
Yeah.
KDE is C++.
Right. What was your question?
I'm just pointing out it's not that new. A lot of it's not, even C++, it's all
Oh, yeah.
legacy C.
Yeah, well, for me, C and C++ are the same. But because they're both unmanaged. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. When I left the Microsoft world and started playing with Linux, I thought that maybe Java was going to be the solution, but it turns out that Java isn't really doing very well on the Linux world. These are well, I'll get Python basically, Python and C#. But
Iron Python runs like 2.5 times faster than C Python.
does it? I have a.
On .NET.
Depends on
Windows.
Okay. Actually, I have a. Let me finish my talk. So, so this is Java. So yeah, one of the things I think the reason why Java didn't do very well, and I talk about this in the book, is just that it's overly complicated, and I think it was created as a bunch of specs, and then the specs it was like the waterfall model, and then the specs turned into code. And I think if it had kind of grown organically as code, it wouldn't have turned out this way. But obviously, I talk about that more in the book. And here's a little screenshot I have of the Eclipse box. And yep.
You're not pulling any punches, are you?
So yeah, asymptotically approaches being usable. I was going to talk about Eclipse in my book, and then I found this screenshot, and so I just put this in instead. And so Mono.
Back to that later and let us read it.
Yeah, my slide's up on the web. Will be up on the web. And so Mono, it's kind of interesting. It's built by a community, unlike Java. It works well on Linux. I run Mono apps every day. I don't run any Java apps. And the downside is that the core language and class libraries have little community input because it's all basically whatever Microsoft does, they copy, and there's little changes outside. It's richer than .NET, but outside of what is specified as what is .NET is kind of a barren wasteland. There's a lot of FUD about Mono.
Wait, hold on. So you're saying that what's outside of .NET in Mono is a barren wasteland?
Yes, it is still.
So you would consider like the compiler as a service and stuff that Miguel was showing at PDC just not worth it?
Those are small pieces. Those are small pieces. I talk about what is not a barren wasteland in a minute. So so one of the things that surprised me about Mono is that there's a ton of FUD. There's a huge amount of fear by free software programmers about it. So these are some sample quotes that I found that I came across in a discussion I was having. Here's just some more. This is I found it on a website, and a lot of people fear that because .NET is covered by patents, it makes Mono suspect. I'm not sure if you guys realize it, but. And I know people who have chosen to not use C# because they wanted something cross-platform, but they were afraid of the FUD around Mono, and so they went and chose other languages. So I think if Microsoft cares about C# and multi-platform stuff, they should do more to try and help allay the fears. So Python.
You want to consider like Silverlight and Monolight or Moonlight and all that kind of stuff helping to say, hey, guys,
that by itself doesn't change it, because even within Moonlight there are aspects of it that are not free. So
I just
like
because some of the changes that have been made, like ASP.NET MVC being released under MSPL, which is an OSI approved license, and
yeah, none of those things have changed it.
Yeah, all
So-
the open source developers are afraid to use Mono because they're paranoid about licenses. None of the Windows developers want to use Mono because they don't think the support is there for their stuff to run on.
Right. So, yeah, I mean the Windows people. But what a lot of programmers would do is they'll run it on .NET on Windows, and then for their Mac and Linux users, they'll use Mono. But people are afraid, hey, if Mono is going to be sued one day, then Mono is not. Then therefore, .NET is not a multi-platform system. So, so the last language I've discovered was Python, and it is the most popular language on Linux after C and C++, and it is a very rich community. And every non-trivial piece of C, C++ code I found has Python wrappers, but it's kind of surprisingly under the radar. But I think Python really is the ultimate competitor of .NET.
But it doesn't have braces.
Doesn't have braces, yeah, that's fine. But what it does have is stuff like this, which is this is a CFD, computational fluid dynamic analysis of a combustion engine, and there's none of that for .NET. Of course, the downside is there's no standard IDE and debugger, graphical one at least. There's like some out there, and you can try it out. There's one by Stan called Stan's Python IDE, and there's one Eric. I think it's by Eric wrote it. So, and it's also interpreted still, and not really very good at multi-threading. So, in some ways, it's still in the prototype stage of development. And the runtime is written in C, which is kind of
The CLR is written in.
yeah. Well, yeah, right, exactly. Well, that's one of the reasons why it's moving slowly.
talking about the CLR here, man.
I mean, that's also why it's moving slowly, and also why Microsoft has a much bigger team than what Mono has. So, and actually, one of the things I found is that IronPython runs, in certain instances, runs slower than CPython. So it should, in theory, run faster. But there is some interesting question about whether or not Python, because it was never designed with C# was pretty much always designed to be compiled, and Python has just always been interpreted, and it's 15 years old and still interpreted. And there are various efforts out there to make it faster, but they're research efforts, and they're not considered part of the Python community. So on the web, I'll just talk a little bit about that. It's PHP's world, and we all live in it. And of course, we can laugh at the PHP language, but it's better than C, a lot better than C. So really, what else matters? I mean, and it's, got a nice community. And there is Java and .NET and Ruby out there. So yeah, Perl, I've never seen Perl, but /dot's written in it. And shell, there's a lot of shell scripting. And it's basically the kind of the glue for the OS. Like you boot Linux, and like I think the first bit of user mode code is a shell script, and that loads up all the rest of the code. So anyway, so that's just my little survey. And I think I have one more slide. Maybe I don't. Actually, I do, but it's not working. Oh yeah, there it is. So I think Mono FUD hurt C#, and I think Microsoft should do what it can to like make it public that Mono is a friend and a partner. And the other thing I think is we need better tools to automatically wrap C and C++ code bases. So a lot of what happens now is somebody takes a C++ project and then they write some Python wrappers, and then they come out with a new version of C++ project, and they've added things to the header files and taken things away. And the Python people want to know, okay, well, or anybody who wraps it wants to know, okay, well, I just want to have some tool that will just automatically run on the new header files and generate me some new wrappers. And as far as I can tell, .NET doesn't have any kind of way to automatically do that. And Python does. And I think that's a cool feature that .NET should add. And the last question I'll ask is, if Mono is basically copying .NET and giving it all away, then what exactly are you guys doing? So, and that's all I have to say. And if you're Microsoft, I recommend trying out Ubuntu. Okay.